Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Trail Mix, where the nuts might be a little stale, but the company is always fresh.
Hey there! We're live on YouTube, I believe, and we're talking Putin. He's been busy, folks. It's not just Ukraine. We're seeing this dude all over the place in Eastern Europe. Poland. 17 drones shot down on Polish soil. And Romania, drones over Romania. And now, yesterday, Estonia. Not drones, fighter jets. And Putin is calling this accidental or, well, no, wait. And also our president, Donald Trump, trying to say it's accidental. Here are the details.
The Swedish military released these two photos on Friday of Russian jets that it said had taken part. It specified the pictures were taken over the Baltic Sea after the violation occurred. Reuters was able to confirm the aircraft seen in the pictures as Russian MiG-31 fighter jets. Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna said his country called for a NATO meeting, which will take place next week.
War in Europe expanding. I don't think this is a very good time to have Donald Trump as our president.
The Swedish military released these two photos on Friday of Russian jets that it said had taken part. It specified the pictures were taken over the Baltic Sea after the violation occurred. Reuters was able to confirm the aircraft seen in the pictures as Russian MiG-31 fighter jets. Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna said his country called for a NATO meeting, which will take place next week.
War in Europe expanding. I don't think this is a very good time to have Donald Trump as our president.
The Swedish military released these two photos on Friday of Russian jets that it said had taken part. It specified the pictures were taken over the Baltic Sea after the violation occurred. Reuters was able to confirm the aircraft seen in the pictures as Russian MiG-31 fighter jets. Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna said his country called for a NATO meeting, which will take place next week.
War in You tell me, folks. what are we seeing? All I know is it's not getting a lot of discussion here on our side, but it sure is in Europe. I'm going to show you some stuff here they're saying over in Europe. They're taking this pretty seriously. We aren't so much.
The drones flying into Polish airspace. There were many who initially thought, well, perhaps this was a mistake. Perhaps, these drones went off course. Yeah. I think at this point, we all have to treat these drone incursions and now these fighter incursions as Putin testing NATO.
Well, there's a difference between drones and fighters, right? There were pilots in those planes. That could have turned into a conflict.
Absolutely. And certainly our NATO pilots are trained to operate in a safe and professional way and to intercept incoming fighter jets. And thankfully, that's exactly what they did. Wow. But now is the time to shift from this focus on the specific military operation and think about what is the larger political response? Because this testing that Putin is doing, he is testing to see if NATO will stand unified. Right. He is testing not just Estonia and Poland, he's testing the United States of America. And he is waiting to hear from US leaders that this is unacceptable and that we will push back. when we saw the drones going into Polish airspace, we did not see even a forceful rhetorical response. Now, certainly our military, working with allied militaries, have planned for more robust defenses in Eastern Europe. They are executing that mission as we speak. But what Putin is looking for is a sign of true division politically within NATO, and he is looking to see whether the U.S. will show support.
What does that response actually look like? If you were in the White House right now, what would you say the appropriate response is?
Well, again, the first response is to be forceful in your speech. Silence does not signal that we are supporting Europe. So there needs to be an actual, verbal response. And, ideally, something beyond a quick tweet, actually a statement of concern and support. Then you shift into the more tangible responses. And I already talked about how in NATO military channels, our militaries are doing exactly what they need to do. They are working together to shore up defenses in the East, and that's what needs to happen. But in Ukraine, what you see is a structure right now of European support for the Ukrainians that appears to not include the United States of America. And that is what Putin is seeing.
Should those Russian MiGs have been shot down?
Well, I certainly wouldn't make a military recommendation. I have great confidence in
How
how
come it's not an Article 5? Would the nation need to be attacked by those jets to bring us to the next level?
Article 5 specifically refers to an attack, whereas this Article 4, they're assessing the situation and they're needing to consult on further measures.
Can 4 lead to 5? Can that review lead to something greater?
Well, 4 could lead to 5. The idea is that a NATO nation would invoke Article 5 if they actually felt they were under attack, and that is not the assessment at this time. Again, I would characterize this as testing. NATO countries, and again, the United States, is being tested.
Let's talk a little bit about the thought that's been put out there that the potential way to getting to a ceasefire and end the conflict rests in territory swaps, whether it's
saying we ought to be saying more about
Russia is already
what Russia's
taken
doing
over,
and doing
or
more
Ukraine
about
potentially
Russia's
getting Russian
doing.
land
I
and
agree
holding
with
on to
that.
it. Is that a realistic prospect? Either one?
So I think it's important to reject that proposal, which is wholly a proposal that Vladimir Putin agrees with. The Russians are looking to achieve through some kind of magical silver platter offer of territory what it could not achieve through military operations on the battlefield. We have to remember that even though the Ukrainians have suffered tremendously, what we are seeing is an incredibly slow Russian advance. I mean, if Russia kept advancing at the same rate that they are doing now, it would take years for them to conquer all of Donbass. Donbass is precisely the area that Russia wants Ukraine to give up. And the word swap is a complete misnomer because this isn't an exchange. This is Ukraine being forced to give up sovereign territory.
Another annexation.
Exactly.
Give us a status update on what's happening right now with weapons being provided to Ukraine, because the president has a different approach than Joe Biden. He's allowing NATO members to essentially buy American equipment and provide it to Ukraine, so we're not incurring the cost. We know there was an initial purchase by the Netherlands, and we've seen some other action, but is this working as planned? Is Ukraine getting what it needs?
So first of all, I think it's important to not use the term allowing Europe to purchase U.S. weapons, because for decades now, Europeans have been purchasing U.S. equipment, U.S. weapons, and it's not a grand gesture on the part of the United States.
And I'm not trying to make a statement by using that term, but of course we were providing that weaponry until Donald Trump got into the White
Absolutely.
House.
So what you see right now is Europe has actually stepped up, and they are basically shouldering not just the U.S. share, the previous U.S. share of weapons, they're also continuing to shoulder a burden on their own. And so if you look at their new process, it's this prioritized Ukraine requirements list process. It's kind of a cumbersome name that is managed out of NATO headquarters. This is a process where the Europeans and other countries around the world, for that matter, can purchase what the NATO staff and what the Ukrainians deem are their most important requirements. But this is all the stuff that the U.S. used to provide. It's, the munitions for HIMARS,
right.
These, longer range launch systems. It's, interceptors for Patriot systems, for air defense. So these items, these munitions in particular, are now being funded by the Europeans. They're helping U.S. defense industry maintain open production lines, which is extremely helpful for not just U.S. industry, but also for U.S. readiness, so that if we need to purchase the same things, the factories are up and running and we can just go right in and be able to purchase. So this is a huge boon to the U.S., and it's certainly helpful for the Ukrainians. But you have to wonder, how long can Europe do both its share and the U.S. share? Before 2025, at the point of January 2025, the Europeans and the U.S. had provided about the same amount, over $60 billion in security assistance. So it was equivalent. If you want the equivalent volumes in order to pressure the Russians to go to the negotiating table, to agree to a ceasefire, that means that the Europeans may be actually spending double what they were. This could be very challenging for their budgets. And you also have to look at the fact that they're paying for their own defense. They've all agreed to increase their defense spending for their own defense as well. NATO now has a 5% of GDP target of spending. And so, these defense expenditures are going to be really considerable for these NATO countries, and they'll have longer term implications for European defense industry and for U.S. defense industry.
Well, Laura, it's.
Hey, stop playing with your fanny pack. You need the Bearskin Tactical Hoodie 4.0 to get comfortable in the wild. It's the ultimate 10-pocket utility hoodie for fishing, golf, hunting, camping,
He's making
boating,
a point
or
there
conquering.
about the what the Europeans spend, and there is so much lying about that. We are about 11th in percentage of our GDP on aid to Ukraine. Now that's when you put together both military and humanitarian aid. Our rank goes up higher when it is just military, but it's just not true that Europeans are not pulling their fair share of assistance. It's just not true. There.
Poland at the end of the day. So in terms of actual NATO security guarantees that can be offered to Ukraine, can Europe even do that? And how far away are we to a viable security guarantee that comes from the European continent?
So I think, first of all, it's important to not rule out that the U.S. should be a part of whatever the security, and I would say security assurances for Ukraine, as opposed to security guarantee. Because I think that right now, Putin is only looking at one country as the signal of whether he's going to get away with taking over Ukraine and maybe moving beyond, and that's the United States. So I wouldn't say just European. That said, what the Europeans are doing right now is really impressive in trying to stand up a mechanism that would offer support to Ukraine. It is not an Article 5 guarantee. I don't think that there are many countries in Europe or around the world that actually would consider, fighting directly with Russia in response to future Russian aggression. But what the Europeans are trying to do is have an architecture that bolsters Ukraine in its ability to withstand aggression. It's really important to recognize that what they're talking about is for after a ceasefire. So we can't ignore the fact that business right now should focus on the ceasefire. You can't ever get to security assurances if you don't actually stop the fighting in the first place. And of course, this is what President Trump was focused on in the past. So the Europeans will look to a potential multinational force, again, to help bolster Ukraine in the wake of a ceasefire. And that force would be multidimensional and has a lot of aspects that still need to be worked out.
That was Laura Cooper. I always have liked her. She was in the Defense Department way back when, and I guess in the Obama years. I don't know about the Biden years. She always is clear, doesn't seem to get all emotional or worked up. She's got a point of view that we ought to be doing more in Europe. A lot of people have that point of view. So I'm going to hop around here and look at some of the coverage around, not just in Europe, but let's go. I'm going to take a look at, there's an Indian station that I've been following some, and I kind of like their style of news reporting. It's WION. It's based in New Delhi. And their reputation with media bias fact check is least biased overall for factual reporting. For those of you who aren't familiar with media bias fact check, that's a good place to check on the real story on who's biased and who isn't. So here's their report on these Russia-NATO tensions that we're seeing right now. I'm going to pull it up on my little stream here, and they're a little more direct, I think, than we are in their coverage, but they're not biased. I mean, it's just that they don't mess around. I mean, they say what's happening, and I think you might see the difference here. Pull them up and let it rip.
Violating their airspace, triggering an immediate response from the NATO forces and raising concerns of a dangerous escalation. On Friday, the Polish border guard said that 2 Russian fighter jets violated the safe zone surrounding the Petro-Baltic oil platform in the Baltic Sea. They further added that the jets performed a low-altitude flyover, breaching the platform's protected airspace.
Low altitude.
And this comes just days after the Polish aircraft shot down suspected Russian drones
They had their
that had
transponders
entered into the
off
national
too.
airspace. Now, Estonia has accused Russia of an incursion, and according to the Estonian military, the Russian fighter jets entered the Estonian airspace in the area of Vaindloo Island.
It's always
which is a
easy
small
to
island
forget where
located in the Gulf of
Estonia is.
Finland in the Baltic Sea.
I'm afraid, but there it is.
Now, the military said in a statement that the aircraft did not have flight plans and their transponders were turned off, nor were the aircraft in the two-way radio communication with the Estonian air traffic
no
services.
Communication,
And this is in
transponders
fact
off.
the latest flashpoint
no
in
accident.
weeks marred by repeated Russian provocations. Meanwhile, Sweden has released photographs of Russian jets that it said had violated Estonian airspace.
There's
It
the jet.
specified that these pictures were taken over the Baltic Sea after the jets had left the Estonian airspace. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called Russia's actions to be simply unacceptable and has accused Russia of deliberately destabilizing the region. Estonia has now formally requested the NATO consultations under Article 4, which allows any member to call talks if their security is threatened. The talks could take place early next week.
Russian fighter jets entering to the NATO airspace, so it is a threat. And also NATO responded in a very adequate ways. NATO fighters went up, and of course we had all the readiness to respond. But yes, happily they were escorted after 12 minutes out from NATO airspace. And if you have Russian fighters in your airspace, if you ask, is it a threat? Of course it is a threat.
Now, Russia has denied the charges, claiming the MiG-31s were on a scheduled flight from Karelia to Kaliningrad and remained over neutral waters more than 3 kilometers from the Estonian airspace. European Union's foreign policy chief has said that the NATO members must not show any weakness because this makes Russia do more. The American President Donald Trump has said that he is not pleased with the situation, adding that this could be big trouble for Moscow.
I don't know how they could matter-of-factly report that.
Well, I'm going to have to look at it. They're going to be briefing me in a short while, so I'll let you know about it tonight or tomorrow.
What's your take in general? Just
well, I don't love it. I don't love it. I don't like it when that happens.
Who does love it?
But I'll let you know later. They're going to brief me in about an hour.
There we have it. Yeah, that's the Indian report, very matter of fact. Speaking of airspace and the question of what do you do next? What about a no-fly zone? That's something that our own Whiskey Jack talked about the other day when we were discussing this. And I caught this discussion here from a fella. You'll see here talking about the idea of no-fly zones. It's almost starting to happen because today Poland scrambled a bunch of jets when Russia launched drones over Western Ukraine, and they didn't shoot anything down. But I think we're on the verge of NATO jets shooting down drones over Ukraine, which would be the next step if that happens. And if Putin keeps swarming drones all over Western Ukraine, you could see that. You could definitely see that happening. And here's this fella. We'll see in a minute who exactly he is, but talking about some of the options that they have
of protecting Ukrainian civilians against these ongoing Russian missile and drone strikes, and also doing something which Russia would definitely not like, and therefore demonstrating that there are consequences for behaving in this way.
Yesterday, 3 heavily armed Russian MiG fighters violated Estonian airspace over the Gulf of Finland. That's happened before, but never for such a protracted period of time. The jets were in NATO airspace for at least 12 minutes. The longest incursion before that was about 1 minute over Estonia. NATO scrambled its jet fighters in response, and Italian fighter jets were dispatched. The Estonians immediately invoked NATO Article 4, which calls for a discussion with member states when the territorial integrity of a country has been threatened. While the Estonian, European and EU response has been swift and condemnatory, Donald Trump expressed little in the way of concern. It looks like that is how it's going to be with Washington. This latest violation of airspace, of course, follows a breach in Poland. What exactly is afoot? Joining me now is Keir Giles, Senior Consulting Fellow at Chatham House, Chatham House's Russia and Eurasia programme. Thanks so much for joining me, Keir. How worried should we be by this latest incursion?
Well, the honest answer is we don't know. There's nothing new in this pattern of escalation by Russia, and it was predicted very widely after the previous incursions in Poland that you mentioned, that if there was not a strong response that was distinctly uncomfortable for Moscow, we should expect more of the same, more probing and testing of NATO's responses, stepping up until Russia does find that response. But there's a lot we don't know about exactly how this incursion into Estonian airspace played out. There have been a lot of calls this morning for Estonia, or the Baltic air policing mission that was in Estonia, the Italian aircraft, to have shot down these Russian planes in order to send a message to Russia that this had to stop, in the way that, for example, Turkey did back in 2015. Yeah. But there was a great deal that we don't know about how this played out. For instance, you mentioned that these aircraft were heavily armed. You might have that from a reliable source. It's not something that I've seen reported elsewhere.
Right. No, I'd seen it in one of the initial reports, which said that they were armed with hypersonic missiles. I don't know if that's true or not, but and I don't suppose we'll ever find out, will we? It's also
well,
the case that
MiG-31s
Moscow
can carry hypersonic missiles. That's one of the main purposes they have been being used for
Which
in
is
attacking
Putin's
Ukraine.
favorite weapon,
But that
they
doesn't
say.
necessarily mean that they were carrying them
Hypersonic,
in this particular
dude,
incident. It's
which
one
we
of
don't
the
have.
details that we simply don't know in order to assess just how exactly NATO could have responded, should have responded, or whether they actually did everything correctly.
Well, the pure denial from Moscow that the incursion happened at all, when, according to the Estonians, it happened, I think they first said 17 minutes in their airspace, and certainly, 12 minutes in their airspace. Does that suggest to you that it wasn't something which had been directed from the Kremlin, or that it was simply a case of the Russians lying again?
We shouldn't pay any attention to denials of anything from the Kremlin after the very clear The Polish incident in the previous week was slightly different. There was a much more ambivalent response from the Kremlin, a slightly delayed one, almost as though they'd been taken by surprise, and then saying, well, we didn't plan to attack anything in Poland, which, of course, leaves open a wide range of possibilities of what they did plan to do, including sending these unarmed drones into Polish airspace. Here, though, it's much more similar to the classic Russian pattern of simply denying everything and pretending it didn't happen.
There were no consequences, were there, for Turkey when, and I think it was only a matter of seconds or a minute or so that Russian fighters entered Turkish airspace. They were shot down immediately, and there was not much comeback from Moscow on that, was there?
Well, there's a lot of mythology around this as well. Neither of those things are exactly true. It's true that on this last pass over Turkish airspace, that Russian Sukhoi 24M bomber was only there for a matter of seconds, but this was after a repeated pattern of infringing airspace and repeated warnings from the Turks that this would lead to an incident where they would be shot down. And in fact, they'd previously shot down Russian drones in the same area. So it wasn't out of the blue. It was Russia repeatedly testing its luck and then finding that its luck ran out. Also, there were severe comeback countermeasures from Russia against Turkey afterwards. There was a prolonged period of economic warfare. It ended up with a Turkish apology. But, and the key point here for people who are looking at this incident in Estonia, but there were no more violations of Turkish airspace in that manner because Russia knew how they would be dealt with.
Yeah, we heard a couple of weeks ago on this program from a writer and academic, German academic, about the possibilities of World War III. somewhat worryingly, he cited Estonia and the Russian invasion of the very island over which those jets later flew.
Again, that's not exactly right. If you're talking about Kala Masala, he's not talking about the island of Vainlaw in the Gulf of Finland, which is where this incursion was taking place, in the airspace around that. Also, his suggestions of how exactly Estonia could be targeted by Russia have been questioned by people who are familiar with the terrain there. Now, I look into this quite a bit. My own book is called Who Will Defend Europe? But it's actually not necessarily the frontline states that are the targets here. Russia has been practicing delivering damage using tools like these MiG-31s and the missiles that they carry at immensely long distances. So you don't have to be a neighbor of Russia to be at risk from this.
Hello, my name is Adam Ferrari, the Chief Executive Officer of Phoenix Energy. I look forward to you joining us at our next investor webinar, where you can drill deeper into our 9 to 13% annual interest rate bond offerings and see how our company has become an emerging leader in the oil and gas industry. In 2024, Phoenix Energy rose to become the 11th most prolific oil and gas operator in the Williston Basin, one of America's top producing regions. We are now right alongside industry giants like ConocoPhillips and EOG and plan to continue rising in the rankings. Our daily production rates have risen as high as 18,000 barrels of oil per day. We've sold more than 4 million barrels, and we're just getting started. We hope to see you at our brief webinar. In less than 1 hour, you will learn more about our 9 to 13% annual interest rate bond offerings and the U.S. oil and gas sector. These Regulation D 506E bond offerings are open to accredited investors. Our team will guide you through the details of how to get started. Sign up for the webinar and start your journey with Phoenix Energy.
Sorry about that. Had to go stir my beans, which I'm heating up some baked beans that I cut up some peppers and onions and about to burn them. Didn't want to burn them. Okay, we're going to wrap up here at the half hour with the next thing to think about. Well, not that we quit thinking about Putin's military incursions, I guess we could call them. Want to be polite. I think when you violate our airspace, it's an invasion. But is what he's already doing politically in Europe. That's the scariest thing to me, because I don't think he's going to invade militarily right now. But he is well along the path of getting big chunks of parliaments in Europe. So I did this little video about that. Putin doesn't need tanks to invade NATO. He's already inside their parliaments and news feeds. Yesterday, 3 Russian jets buzzed Estonia. The scarier invasion is quieter. Moscow's networks are backing pro-Kremlin candidates across Europe, trying to fracture NATO unity. Romania even tossed out an entire election for Russian interference. This isn't some prank. It's Putin betting he can break us without firing a shot.